All right, welcome. So tonight's topic is collaborating with yarn shops. We have lots of fiber farmers, yarn shops, and indie dyers on this call, and we're going to be going through different types of collaborations that we frequently encounter and discuss how each can work. So I'm going to ask questions, and Mary Jeanne and Carol are going to weigh in and answer, and we'll talk a little bit on each of the subjects and then move on to the next. And at the end, we'll have a discussion portion that will not be recorded so that you're free to ask whatever questions you like without any worry of judgment from the rest of the internet. All right. So the first thing that I definitely want to bring up before we start the question and answer portion is that knowledge is power here. If you're thinking of diving into a breed specific yarn, a farm specific yarn, learning more about wool is a great first step. So Mary Jeanne and I went together collectively and came up with some ideas about where you can learn about wool. The first place is books. There are lots of really great books. I've got a few here. This one's Book of Yarn by Clara Parks, and she also wrote one called Book of Wool. You can pick these up used through Amazon. You can probably check them out at your local library, but they just get into differences between breeds. And one of the questions that we get asked more than any other question when someone's approaching it not from the farm side is, what breed is the right breed? And so for us, I mean, we've got an encyclopedia of sheep to choose from out there. So the more information you come armed to the table with, the better the yarn is that we can make for you. Another text that you might want to check out is the Fleece and Fiber Source Book. Mine has lost its dust jacket, but this book is by Deb Robson, and it is huge and it's encompassing, and it has these wonderful sections throughout on different sheep breeds with pictures, and it's a great text. We also discussed going to a fiber festival, doing a local farm visit, going to your county and state fair. Mary Jeanne, you had a very specific experience related to when you were kind of learning more about BFLs, right? Do you want to talk about that?
Before I owned Bat and Kill Fibers, I owned Finger Lakes Fibers, which is now Fiber Arts in the Glen in Watkins Glen, New York. And I had several customers coming in saying they wanted something with BFL. And I'm like, BFL? What, some sort of boyfriend loving? I didn't know. So I got myself down to Rhinebeck with my knitting. This is way before I had a booth with a line out the door. This is like 2005, 2006, when BFL was the breed of the year. And they brought trailer loads of them from northern Michigan. And it was quite a year. I didn't know Carol yet. Well, I did. Well, that's another story. Anyhow, I sat there in the bleachers at the little sheep show area with my knitting, like 2 or 3 hours, listening to the judge talk about the animal's shape, but also the fleece, and then visiting with the farmers and saying, tell me about this and this. So I did this like deep dive into what is BFL and why is everyone so excited. And everyone was so nice to me. I just said, I own a yarn store and I want to be informed. And that's how that was, I already had the Clara Parks books. Deb Robson's book hadn't come out yet. But that was how I started, just going to festivals. And I even went to the Finger Lakes Wool Pool up there in Seneca Falls at Empire Farm Days, where I met Polly Drexler from Springside Farm. Boy, she'll never let me forget that. I wanted to buy everything I could find. And she's like, no, stop. Don't buy that. No.
Definitely having a fiber friend or someone to like help you along the way is such a boost. Really? Getting to see someone who knows what they're doing look through a fleece is a really transformative experience. So if you have a friend who's a hand spinner, or they're really deep into processing fleeces, or they've got knowledge, maybe they're a farmer, go on a trip with them, go to a fiber fair with them, and like really get your hands in a fleece. Because for me, that was the biggest difference between my knowledge as someone who's worked pretty extensively in this industry and definitely does a lot of knitting, and I spin, but getting to go to a farm with Mary Jeanne was like next level for me. It informed me in different ways. So there's the book learning stuff. Yeah. And then there's the actual hands-on learning. So definitely take the time and think about that as you enter this process. So the first relationship we're going to talk about is the farm to LYS connection. So this is a farm going to a local yarn store and wanting to sell them a yarn or produce a yarn in collaboration with them. And before you get to that stage, you should really stop at another stage. So Mary Jeanne, I'm going to let you talk about what you think the store should help weigh in on here.
So I have spun for some farmers that I make them the yarn, and then they decide they're going to take the yarn I've made them to a yarn store and try to sell it. In some cases, the farmer has said, oh, I want to make this into a worsted. And I say to them, well, you know what? That breed would be nicer at a DK. But they say, no, I think I want it in worsted. Then they take the worsted into the yarn store, and the yarn store owner says, oh, that seems kind of coarse and thick. I'd really have liked that in a DK. And then we're stuck because we've already made it, and we can't make more until A, they sell it, and B, they shear their sheep again. So over the years, I've really come to understand if my farm customer is looking to sell to a yarn store specifically, I feel like they need to plan it out ahead with the yarn store before they ever come and see me, or they can bring us the wool and get on our list. But before it's time to spin, they need to know what their customer is going to want. Now, this same advice does not hold if you have an on-farm store or you sell at a farmer's market and you know what your customer likes and you know what your sheep will produce, in which case, you know, and you don't need to be doing this step. But if it's your goal to walk into a yarn store and sell to them, I would recommend visiting with them first, introducing yourself and saying what you're thinking of doing. And they may say, well, you know, everyone who knits at our shop are sock knitters, which is like a kind of store. I mean, especially in larger cities, there's probably 3 or 4 stores, and one's known for its sock knitting, and one's known for its big chunky accessories, and one is that hardcore sweater group. And you may have a breed that would make great sweater yarn if we knew that's what you wanted and didn't tie it all up in sock yarn. So you need to have that understanding going into it.
Definitely. And the other things that a yarn store can kind of help direct are, for example, if you know that you're going to want the yarn dyed, the yarn store can help you come up with a palette that's in season that will sell well in their shop. It also, like Mary Jeanne spoke to, gives you an idea of kind of the vibe of the shop. So if you haven't necessarily settled on a name for the yarn or a label for the yarn, maybe you want to cater it a little bit so it matches the shop that you're hoping to be in. So the next kind of relationship is turning your farm into a store. So this is the farm as a local yarn store. And we definitely want to get Carol to weigh in on this one. Carol, what do you think are the biggest challenges in both selling and, you know, growing the fiber, but then turning around and dyeing it and selling it? Is it mostly labor? Is it time?
Well, labor is a big part of it. I was lucky when my yarn store was open that I was right next door to the farm. I could go back and forth if the sheep needed something. And I was able to dye when there weren't customers. One of the hard parts for me was my location. And, you know, it's not downtown Saratoga. It can't be. So the walk by traffic, there was none. It was a destination yarn shop. So people came on certain days, really. It wasn't busy every day.
Mm-hmm. And that is something we want to touch on. You know, if you're going to decide to make a farm store at your farm, you need to decide like how often it's going to be open based on your schedule as a farmer. And do you have that stream of tourism, you know, to use? And are you okay with it maybe being seasonal, with it being occasional?
Well, our customer, Paula, from White Barn Farm used to have an on-farm yarn shop like Carol did,
Mhm.
with Thursday night sit in it and carried needles and commercial brands as well as her farm yarn. And she sold all her everything except for her own brand. And she put up a shed, the yarn shed, with Venmo. Here's my Venmo. If you want 3 skeins, Venmo me the money. And she put up a lockbox where you can push dollar bills in. She has yet to have anything stolen. She's making almost as much as she made when she had a store, and all she has to do is keep the shelves stocked.
It's great.
That's
Wonderful.
great. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Another consideration is if you want to have your farm also be a yarn brand, you need to decide the level of dedication that you have towards how big you want your brand to become. Are you willing to do the groundwork to build a website? Do you want to maintain a website? Do you want to do social media? Are you going to keep up a newsletter? All of those things are questions that you have to ask yourself with a farm yarn store, but it's okay to answer no. There's no requirement there. If, for example, you're just going to be open for specific days a year, like for us, it's the Washington County Fiber Tour is a big day for you, Carol, then you can say, I don't need a big social media presence. I just need a newsletter where people can find out if I'm having an event or find out if I'm open. Or maybe you are just going to use Instagram and post up, hey, we're doing pop-up shop hours, and people just watch that and see when it's going to happen. Don't divide yourself too thin, just pick and choose exactly
Right now, I have everything. I have Facebook and Instagram and a website and a newsletter, and none of them get much attention. That's
just focus on one thing or 2 things, and you'll probably see it blossom a little bit more, because you won't be stretched so thin doing so many things on top of already raising the sheep.
Right.
But you sell through a website.
I do.
You don't sell on Etsy.
No, I have my own website.
And from my observation of my customers, I think they're a lot happier when it's their own website, and getting off of Etsy seems like they feel that is worthwhile.
Yes. Yeah.
Etsy is a crowded market. Yeah, Etsy is kind of a crowded market. And then on your website, you can grab people to your newsletter list. You can direct them to different content. Whereas on Etsy, you're really limited in what you can present. It's all under that orange header and it's all the square images. So it's nice to have that versatility.
Yeah.
For me, I feel like Instagram is almost like, I don't know. I feel like Instagram is the easiest to get your name out there in that sense, and then point them to your website. I don't know. I'm bad about the whole newsletter and stuff. It's like trying to keep up with everything. And I've just accepted the fact that like Facebook, I am on Facebook, but I can tell people message me on, email me, because I'm not on Facebook that much.
Yeah.
It's just, there's only so many things you can do.
For sure. Yeah. Research shows that the newsletter is the most effective way to reach your customer and have consistent sales. So if you're going to pick and choose, that's the one I would go with.
Okay.
Instagram it used to be kind of like how you're talking about, but now that it's gone to a very ad and sponsored post heavy platform, people's things are seen a little bit less, especially on a smaller account. So if you have to prioritize the newsletter, because that's like the replacement for a postcard,
Well, let's talk a little more about selling to the yarn stores, because when we were doing introductions, I heard a lot of people asking about the money, honey. How to price it, if they should wholesale, if they should sell on commission. And for those of you who don't know, I used to own a yarn store, so I've got opinions on both sides of this aisle on what works best. And if you want, I can jump in on those, Hannah.
Go ahead. Take it away.
Okay. So if it's a new store to you and you and they aren't sure about working together, get your foot in the door by agreeing to a commission sale. And they sell it for, let's say they sell it for $20, and they get to keep 5 of those dollars and you get 15. So that's a 25.75. And a store, I was always happy with that. I mean, stores, if they want a 50-50, then they should buy it wholesale. They can't have it both ways. They can't have no risk and get half of the sale price. Just my opinion, and that's how I treated it when I owned the store. I would still push for wholesale, but if it's a new relationship, sometimes you need to get your foot in the door. Either way, help your store out by having a nice sample. And if you don't have a sample, at least have a swatch and some pattern suggestions. And it doesn't have to be just all trendy stuff, but it also has to be what you're seeing people knitting. It can't be some beat up old sweater that your mother-in-law knit 50 years ago and your husband's tired of wearing. You gotta have something a little more current than that. So I would really recommend starting with going for wholesale. If you can't get wholesale, then go for commission. But folks, if you go for wholesale, most yarn stores are going to push you for 50-50. And you can try telling them it's like local food and that this is a premium product. And if they're going to sell it for $30, it really shouldn't cost them $15 to sell a $30 skein. And maybe they can take pity on you and give you 20 and only make 10. But the model at yarn stores is still this keystone, which is every one of us who handles yarn in a supply chain typically doubles. And as more and more people handle it, it gets to be a very expensive yarn to the consumer.
And this is another place that going in early before you've made the yarn is really to your advantage, because maybe what the yarn store will say is, oh, I've been looking for a fiber like yours, but I want it in a sock weight. I want it, this kind of structure. I want it in the DK weight. And then you haven't put any money into making the yarn yet. Maybe collectively you'll decide to split the costs of production to make it easier on both parties. And that's a good segue, I think, into the yarn shop to farm scenario. So in this scenario, you're a yarn store and you would like to add a farm yarn, whether domestically produced or regionally produced, to your lineup. And the mill is really there to help kind of guide you and navigate that partnership. Mary Jeanne, could you talk a little bit about finding someone a fiber partner?
The easiest way for a yarn store owner to find a fiber partner is to do what Andrea did in Ohio. She just put the closed sign in the window, drove to the Ohio State Fair, found the sheep barn. You just listen, it goes, bah, bah, bah. So she walked across the whole Ohio State Fair fairgrounds following that noise. She went in there and said, oh, a Corriedale. That's on the short list Mary Jeanne said was a good wool. She went over to the Corriedale people and she said, hey, I want to buy some of your wool. And you just need to watch, and present company excluded, of course. But there are those farmers who see that as a chance to pull the wool over your eyes. And if you don't know, it goes back to the first key point of the night, the knowledge is power. If you don't know what you're looking for in a fleece, like good crimp, nice uniform length, good strength, no cotted tips, very little vegetation. If you don't know all this, it can be a little scary. But I suggest for a shop owner, the easiest thing is to go meet a farmer. There's like open houses and farm tours. The Cooperative Extension sometimes does events. So fiber festivals, at fairs, do whatever to try to meet a farmer. But if that doesn't work, just ask us, because we know a lot of farmers that are looking to be matched up.
Heather Laughing in the comments asked a really good question, and I've answered it in the comments, but I'd love to get your read on it as well. So Heather asked, what advice do you have for farmers who are paying $11 to $15 per skein to have it milled, and then they're offered $15 a skein by the LS? So my answer is that it shouldn't be offered at $15. And then not every yarn shop is going to be an ideal partner for a farm yarn. It's just not going to happen that way. Some stores are prioritizing other things. But finding the right partner is really crucial here. And the right partner is not going to say to you, oh, well, I'll do $15. They'll say, you know, what's your price on it? So it's more, yes, like Rabbit Row Yarns has said below, I typically let the farm tell me what they need to make from the yarn. And then they often tell me that I can sell it for whatever I can get for it. So that's another kind of structure way of handling it. But it's also okay to say, I'm having this yarn made, I need to make 15. I think that you should sell it for 30 to match what I have in my farm store or on my website. That's called MSRP. That's the manufacturer's suggested retail price. And that's your suggested retail price, your value for what you're making. So don't be afraid to stand up for your value of what you're making as a fiber farmer. I know that it's tempting to kind of just like let it go and get it out of your hair, but really this is a premium product in a premium market space. And the customer knows that, and the yarn store that's going to be the right partner is going to know that too.
And you can try to sell it for the suggested retail direct to consumer if you have the shed, the website, a booth at a fiber festival. You don't need to sell to the yarn store.
Right, but all that costs money.
Yeah.
So it's kind of weigh your options, because it could cost so much to get into a fiber festival and drive there and set up and have it rain that you really haven't made the money that you thought you were going to.
We lost money going to Maryland, for example. Because
It was a bad year for
bad.
Maryland. So, but that's the price you pay. All my yarn could have been sold wholesale, and I would have done just as well, and I would have worked half as hard, but you don't know. You don't know.
But the
Definitely.
weather,
It was the
horrible.
weather.
Yeah.
It was the weather.
Definitely the weather.
And location. I mean, people who were in a building did well,
Yeah.
but people
But-
that were out in a mud pit, not so good.
So these are the gambles you take, because in this costs 11 to make and 15, it maybe is all the store's going to offer you, and you were hoping to sell it for 30. Well, and when you subtract out what Carol spent on mileage, the booth, the hotel, the meals, all
Yeah.
of that, she would have been happy to have had $4 a skein and seen that yarn out of her shop and a new batch underway.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But
but
it's not
Just
always
have your,
that way.
you know,
That was different
Yeah.
year. I've had really good
Definitely.
shows. So,
yeah, definitely. Like when you're building out your pricing tier, you want to think about the cost, that cost of goods created, and then add on, maybe consider like a good, which might be, you know, just a smaller margin than your better, and then a best. And, you know, be prepared to bargain, be prepared to talk to the store about what you need to get.
I like to value my wool for what I could sell it for. And then my time dyeing and my cost of dyeing. And then what the mill charges. And then I like to double that. That's my retail price. I know that some people feel like I don't sell it for enough money and I don't get enough for my labor, but that's just my way.
Yeah, ultimately it's definitely up to you. So back to that yarn store going to the farm, you know, we talked about how you can get more informed and you can reach out to farms, visit a farm, talk to the mill. If you just don't know any farmers and you can't find any farmers and you want something specific, you know, you can talk to us. And that kind of links into some of the topics that we have to cover with the dyer to farm relationship. So this is an indie dyer. I know we've got a couple on the call who want to have a domestically milled base. And one of the biggest questions that we usually get from yarn stores that are interested in having custom base and dyers who are interested in having a custom base is, do you know the name of the farm? And we get this all the time, over and over. And Mary Jeanne has such a good point to make here with knowing the name of the farm versus working with a wool pool. So Mary Jeanne, would you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I understand that in a perfect, traceable, very transparent world, your sales as an indie dyer, as a yarn store, where you can say, here's the sheep it came from, here's the farm it came from, that degree of bespoke, custom fiber, you should sell that skein for the $40 to $45 range. It's no different than when you go to a vineyard and they sell this special wine where it was picked only on Tuesday nights, only by moonlight, and then put in its own vat and aged and rolled over only on Thursday nights. That wine is usually twice the price of the rest of the wine at the winery. The grapes still grew on the same estate, and they were still probably picked at night, and they still rolled the barrels over, but they did not have to trace that little small lot. So same thing with you all. If you can be satisfied with saying US sourced fiber or regionally sourced fiber or some other scale besides these 5 sheep from this farm made this yarn, because if you do that, you're at a fully custom yarn, and your price before you ever put dye on it is going to be $2, $3, or even $4 a skein higher. That's before you've done much to it, just for keeping it separate. So when you're an indie dyer who's looking for an affordable base, a reproducible base, Mary, which is something you and I have been talking about. If you want to sell 3 or 4 times a year to a store, you want to be able to have a base that you can count on. And if you're working with just the 5 sheep on the farm around the corner, they're only going to shear them once a year, most breeds. And so right there, you're limiting yourself because your base is never going to be quite the same.
And every year that fiber changes.
In texture and in color.
Yes.
Look at your Corriedales.
Yes.
That I would have called them dark chocolate when they
Right.
moved here.
Yeah.
And just like me, they're
They're
lightning.
graying out.
Milk chocolate
Yeah,
Corriedales,
chocolate.
malted Corriedales.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I love that this pooling of wool, it also creates an opening for farms and farmers who don't want to get in the business of marketing and selling their yarn. They don't want to get into the milling business. They just love raising sheep. And that's great. We need people to be comfortable in that space because those people raise great sheep. If you're really focused on one thing, you do really well at that one thing. And so having the flexibility to say, oh, this is Shetland domestically sourced as the end customer, that is a step towards less price, but also a step towards supporting your local, regional, national textile industry in a fuller, more comprehensive way. Because down to the customer, I don't think that it really matters to every single customer if they can name the sheep. It's cute, but it's not necessarily going to be the biggest selling point.
But when I have a store that asks me, for example, we make a lot of Romney merino. I also work with a lot of Romney farms, members of the Southern Adirondack Fiber Producers Cooperative, a large Romney farm in New Jersey. And I can say this is a profile of the typical Romney farm that we're buying from. Anchorage Farm in Saugerties, New York. I've met these farmers. I've been to their farms. They're big sheep operations. And the same with alpaca. We've been buying a lot of Elaine Gerber's alpaca that she's not selling to the hand spinners or having made into her own yarn, that we then use when a yarn shop or an indie dyer wants an alpaca blend. That's what we use in our house brand oysters and pearls. It's a 50-50 alpaca Corriedale. So I still can profile the farmer. And if it didn't come from Elaine's farm, she curated it on one of the farms she shears from. And Siri Swanson at Yankee Rock does that. When she's shearing, she'll stop by and say, look at this border Leicester we got. And then we'll use that. So I feel like it's just something, and Mark had a good point in the chat. It's a trade-off on what it is you want to be making and offering. If it's this premium product, it's almost like a piece of art at this point. Or if you want to be making a sustainably processed, minimally processed, locally sourced. If you just want to be on this local fiber supply chain bandwagon, you can do it at a lesser level.
Absolutely. And as a dyer, you also want to be really informed about what your customer wants. So a lot of the dyers who come to us are already pretty established. They have an existing line of yarns. Definitely bring us that information when we start talking about making a yarn for you. If you know that your customer is used to a very smooth yarn from you, or they like something that's got a lot of drape, that assists us when moving towards a yarn that you want, linking you up to a farm if that's what we're performing, and then plan ahead and make samples. And this goes for everybody. Plan ahead, make samples. Pattern support is important here, especially for unusual fibers, breed fibers. People they aren't necessarily familiar with what a Jacob feels like or a border Leicester. So if they can see it, that's better than just telling them. And Carol, you make a lot of samples. So I would love to hear about how you manage to choose your samples and also manage the time knitting your samples.
She's sitting here knitting a sample right now.
If I'm sitting, I'm knitting. So, and I love to knit. And I think that's what keeps me going is every time I have a yarn made, I find a project that matches it well. And I did try swatches, and swatches really didn't do much for the booth. But when I have sweaters and shawls on display, people can get an idea of how the yarn will work up or what it feels like. It makes a big difference.
If you're watching and you don't knit and you don't, you're not that kind of fiber crafter, which is fine. A lot of our farmers especially don't double up and do a whole bunch of fiber crafts. They just love the sheep, which is awesome. There are sample knitters out there, people that you can hire to make whatever you want. And you can sell the sample later. Once you're done showing that sample, or the shop is done showing, you can sell that sample to your customer via newsletter, do a quick flash sale. They sell out quick. People want those hand knitted garments.